Hi and welcome back to my channel. Today we are talking about conditional sentences. With the help of these sentences, we express our regrets about the past, our wishes, desires, and suppositions. It's not an easy task to have a conversation without conditional sentences because we humans like to speak in conditional sentences. We enjoy speculating about things that might have happened in the past or may happen in the future. Thus, knowing how to build conditional sentences is extremely useful. So, without any further ado, let us start with today's lesson. Conditional sentences. So, what sentences do we call conditional? Conditional sentences are complex sentences with a subordinate clause of condition. A complex sentence is a sentence that consists of at least two clauses, the main clause and the subordinate clause. There may be several subordinate clauses. For example, your conditional sentence may contain a conditional clause and some other clauses as well. What's important is every conditional sentence has a subordinate clause of condition. Let's look at some examples. If you do your chores, you can have an ice cream later. On what condition can you have an ice cream? On condition that you do your chores. So, you can have an ice cream later is the main clause, and if you do your chores is the subordinate clause of condition. Luca would be very disappointed if he didn't pass the exam. On what condition would Luca be disappointed? On condition that he didn't pass the exam. So the main clause here is Luca would be very disappointed, and the subordinate clause of condition, is if he didn't pass the exam. You will always have at least two clauses in a conditional sentence. They can change places. You can start with the main clause and finish with a subordinate clause, or vice versa. You can start with the subordinate clause and then continue with the main clause. That doesn't matter, but what does matter is that you must have a subordinate clause of condition in a conditional sentence. Conditional sentences may be divided into two groups: of real condition and of unreal condition. Conditional sentences of real condition can be divided into so-called zero conditionals and the conditional sentences of the first type, or conditional I. Conditional sentences of unreal condition can be divided into the second and the third conditionals, or of the second and of the third types. These are just names that exist in grammar to help students memorize different patterns. So this way we have four different types of conditional sentences. Zero conditional, or sometimes it is also called implicative conditional, expresses an implication. They are also called factual conditionals because they speak of facts. Why do we call them zero conditionals? Because they are used to speak about facts which are always true. Not on a particular condition, but always. Hence, we have such a strange name, zero conditionals. Let's look at the example. If you don't sleep enough, your body is unable to function properly. It happens always. If you don't sleep, your body, your brain cannot function properly. That's a regularity, right? Conditional one, or the first conditional, is also called predicative conditional. It predicts what will happen on a particular condition in a particular situation. If you eat all the sweets, you'll be sick. If he doesn't come in time, we'll wait for him. These two types of conditional sentences are real conditionals because they contain real conditions, and thus they belong to the indicative mood. The other two, the second conditional and the third conditional, speak about hypothetical, unlikely, or absolutely unreal situations. Let's look at the second conditional. If I lived near a wood, I would gather mushrooms. If my friend were an engineer, we could work for the same company. These sentences express hypothetical situations which are unlikely. The third conditional speaks about impossible situations. If I had checked my diary, I wouldn't have forgotten her birthday. If we had had better seats, we would have enjoyed the play last night. So here we speak about situations in the past, conditions that could be real in the past, but they were not real. Yeah, so we didn't have those consequences that we might have had if those conditions had been true. Mostly we use the third conditional to express regrets about the past, to speak about something that we didn't manage to do or didn't manage to get in the past. So these two types of conditional sentences, the second conditional and the third conditional, speak about unreal conditions, and thus they exist in the subjunctive mood. If you haven't seen my video on the subjunctive mood, please follow the link down below. There I explain how the subjunctive mood is formed and what types of subjunctive sentences we have, so I do recommend that you watch it. How do we differentiate between real and unreal? In grammar, real means factual, unreal means contrary to fact. An unreal condition is a condition that cannot take place in reality, is either impossible at all or not possible at the moment of speaking. Let's see what I mean. If I were a student, it is not possible at the moment of speaking, though may become possible one day. If I were a bird, is impossible now and will never be possible. So these two subordinate clauses, these two conditions, are unreal in present. Both of them are unreal in present. So the first, if I were a student, is unreal only in present, but may become real in the future. The second, if I were a bird, is unreal in present and will never be real. If I hadn't missed my bus yesterday, it is not possible anymore and will never be possible again. This clause speaks about the past, so it's an unreal condition in the past. Neither of these conditions can take place now. So all of them are unreal, and all of these conditions that you now see on the screen are in the subjunctive mood. Let's take a closer look at zero conditional. Sentences of this type are used to express a certainty, a universal truth, a law of nature, and things like that. The car moves faster if you press the gas pedal down harder. The machine turns on if you press the power button. If you stare at the sun, your eyes get damaged. If you boil potatoes for too long, they get mushy. Ice melts if it is heated. All of these sentences express facts. It's like if A happens, B follows, or if there is A, there is B. The condition and the result in each of these sentences are tightly connected to each other, to the extent that they do not express condition anymore, something that is likely to happen. They express certainty. How do we form zero conditional? We need if and a present tense in the conditional clause and a present tense or the infinitive in the main clause. When I say a present tense, I mean that you can use different present tenses. Obviously, you can use the present simple tense, but also you can use the present progressive or the present perfect tenses. If she has a headache, she takes a painkiller. The present simple tense is used. If she has, she takes. The present simple tense is used in both clauses. In the main clause, she takes a painkiller, and in the subordinate conditional clause, if she has a headache. If plants are overwatered, their leaves start to wilt. Again, the present simple is used in both parts of the sentence. If plants are overwatered, that's the subordinate conditional clause, and the passive voice is used here, are overwatered, right? And in the main clause, their leaves start to wilt. Again, we see the present simple tense active voice. Let's look at some other combinations. Give them this leaflet if they come. Give them, that's an order, yeah? The bare infinitive is used in the main clause. Give them the leaflet. And the present simple is used in the subordinate clause if they come. If you smell the gas, don't turn any light switches on. The present simple is used in the subordinate clause if you smell the gas. And the bare infinitive is used in the imperative. Don't turn any light switches on. Now let's look at other tenses in zero conditional. If I'm eating, I don't talk. If I'm eating is the present progressive tense. I don't talk is the present simple. So you see, we can use the present progressive tense in the subordinate conditional clause. If we want to show a process, if I'm eating, while I'm eating, yeah, when I'm in the process of eating, I don't talk. I think much better if I have had my coffee. What do we have here? We have the present perfect tense in the subordinate clause. If I have had my coffee, we use it to show that I think much better only after I have had my coffee. We want to show the completion of an action. If you are working in the garden, beware of snakes. Again, the present progressive is used in the conditional clause to show a process, and the infinitive is used in the subordinate clause to give an order, yeah, to give a recommendation. Never work with electricity if you haven't turned off the mains. Never do something. It's the imperative, the bare infinitive is used here, and in the subordinate clause, if you haven't turned off the mains, the present perfect is used to show that the action should be completed before another action starts. Yeah, so we want to have this result. The switches should be turned off before we start working with electricity. In some books or on the internet, you might find this structure if plus the present simple tense plus the present simple tense. Predominantly, you use the present simple, that's true, but you also have the freedom of choice. You can use different tenses to show different aspects of your actions, of course. What you need to remember is we use a present tense in zero conditional. So let's take a quick look at this formula again. If plus a present tense plus a present tense or the infinitive. Now the first conditional. Sentences of this type are used to speak about situations dependent on a hypothetical but possible future event. So we speak about real things here, yeah? Hypothetical but possible in the future. So the indicative mood is used here. Let's see the examples. If he is free tomorrow, he will certainly come to our party. If no one comes to help, we'll have to do the work ourselves. The sheep will escape if you don't lock the fence. If Helen sees the mess, she'll be very angry. All of these conditions are real. They absolutely can take place in the nearest future. When we form conditional sentences of the first type, we follow this formula: if plus a present tense plus a future tense. If there is no fresh fish in the shop, we'll have to go to the supermarket. I think the quality of your life will improve if you start wearing glasses. We won't go to the beach if the weather gets worse. What will you do if you miss the ferry? So as you see, in the conditional clauses, the present tense is used. If there is no fresh fish, if you start wearing glasses, if the weather gets worse, and if you miss the ferry. In the main clauses, we use a future tense. In our case, it's the future simple tense. We will have to go, or life will improve, or we won't go, or what will you do? Yeah, what will you do? The conditions we speak about here are considered to be real, are considered to be such that can absolutely take place in the future. Again, we can use other present tenses in the subordinate clause and other future tenses in the main clause. Let's see. If you've finished with the lawn, I'll show you what trees need pruning. The present perfect is used in the subordinate clause of condition, if you have finished, and the future simple is used in the main clause, I will show you. If you're going to the bank, I'll accompany you. The present progressive is used in the subordinate clause and the future simple is used in the main clause. If you are going to buy this computer, I'll lend you some of the money. The structure be going to is used in the subordinate clause and the future simple is used in the main clause. Be going to expresses something which we are planning to do in the nearest future. If you can't translate this little text, how will you cope with the rest of the tasks? Can is used in the subordinate clause and the future simple is used in the main clause. You can absolutely use modal verbs in the subordinate clauses here, as long as they belong to the present. If it has been snowing heavily during the night, you will need to allow extra time for cleaning the driveway. So the present perfect progressive is used in the subordinate clause and the future simple is used in the main clause. Now, though we know that we cannot use any future tenses in the conditional clauses and in the adverbial clauses of time, still will and would can be used in conditional subordinate clauses in several cases. Let's see what these cases are. So we can use will in if clauses or in the subordinate clauses of condition when the if clause describes the possible result of an offer. For example, I will leave the door open if that will stop you worrying. There is an offer, I will leave the door open, and a possible result of this offer, if that will stop you worrying. This is a subordinate conditional clause, but we can use will here. I won't speak to them ever again if that will please him. Again, we use will in the subordinate conditional clause because that's a possible result of an offer. Will may be found in if clauses when will expresses willingness or refusal to do something. This is something we discussed in our lesson on the modal verb will. If you haven't seen that video, please follow the link below. If she won't listen to common sense, there is no point talking to her. If she won't listen to common sense, it's a subordinate conditional clause where we use won't, because in this case it means if she is not willing, if she refuses, if she's not willing to listen. If you will say these nasty things about his friends, of course he won't speak to you. If you will say these nasty things, if you are willing to say, if you want to continue saying those nasty things, right? These are the cases where you can use will in the subordinate conditional clause. Now, you can also use will and would in if clauses to express polite request. If you will just wait here for a moment, I'll tell Mrs. Krause that you've arrived. The subordinate conditional clause, if you will just wait here for a moment, here expresses a very, very polite request. If you would just fill in this form, I'll check the details. The same, this subordinate clause expresses a polite request. If you would be so kind as to take a seat, the manager will come in 5 minutes. The subordinate conditional clause that expresses a polite request. Please remember that this is a very polite way of asking somebody to do something. Now let's look what we can find in the main clause. In real conditionals, the main clause, in its turn, may contain not only a present tense form of the main verb, but also can, could, be able to, be going to, and had better. If I give you the money, could you get me a chocolate bar? If it rains, we are going to stay at home and watch some movies. You'd better take my car if you want to get there fast. If you're done with your part of work, you can help your friends. So we see the modal verb could used in the main clause and the first sentence. The periphrastic modal structure be going to is used in the second sentence in the main clause. Had better is used in the main clause in this sentence. Yeah, and again, we can see can here. So we can absolutely use different modal verbs and periphrastic modals in the main clause. Okay, the second conditional. Sentences of this type are counterfactual. They express things that are contrary to fact. They contain conditions that cannot take place in reality, are either impossible at all or not possible at the moment of speaking. If I were you, I would accept this offer. If you did morning exercises every day, your health would be much better. We see that these two sentences express something which is contrary to what we have in reality. The formula is if plus the past simple or the past progressive or the subjunctive to for the verb to be. The subjunctive mood is something that you do want to know because a lot of conditional sentences contain the subjunctive mood. So the formula is if plus the past simple tense or the past progressive tense or subjunctive to plus would, could, might plus the infinitive. The subjunctive mood in the subordinate clause of condition here is only used with the verb to be because only the verb to be has its distinct form in the subjunctive mood. When we form conditional sentences of the second type, we use the following formula. If plus the past simple tense or the past progressive tense or the subjunctive to plus would, could, might plus the infinitive. If I were you, I wouldn't tease the dog. If she had more free time, she would go to yoga classes. If you haven't seen my video on the subjunctive mood, please check the link to that video in the description down below. If it weren't raining now, we could go to the beach. In short, if you look at these sentences, you see if I were you, and were is the subjunctive mood. We don't say if I was you, it's not correct. We say if I were you, yeah, but the problem is today in the English language, only the verb to be has its distinct forms of the subjunctive mood. That's why with the rest of the verbs, we use the past simple tense, but that doesn't mean that they are equal phenomena. They're two different phenomena, right? In the main clause of the sentence, I wouldn't tease the dog, we use what is called the analytical subjunctive, that is, would plus the bare infinitive. And I explain that in detail in that video on the subjunctive mood, so please do check it. This subordinate conditional clause contains the so-called synthetic subjunctive to, yeah? And the main clause contains the analytical subjunctive. If I were you, I would study harder. If I were you is the subordinate conditional clause, and I would study harder is the main clause. Let's look at more examples of conditional sentences of the second type. If you bought a bike, you would get a lot fitter. If the weather weren't rough, we could sail to the island. If shops didn't offer big discounts on a regular basis, they wouldn't sell very much. If you could go back in time, what century would you go to? What would you do if you met your doppelganger? Were I you, I wouldn't buy such an expensive car. So as you see, all of these situations are hypothetical. We speak about something which now is definitely unreal. Some of the situations may become real in the future, but now they are not. So that's why we're speaking in the subjunctive mood. We're dealing with things that are contrary to fact. Now, the third conditional. Sentences of this type speak about the past. They express impossible conditions in the past and their probable result in the past. Conditions in the sentences are absolutely unreal because we cannot go back in time and change something in it. They are not real and will never be real. If the weather had been nice yesterday, we would have gone to the beach. If I hadn't had my ID with me, I wouldn't have been able to board the plane. Here we speak about two situations that we left behind. Two situations from the past, and we cannot change them anymore. The formula we use is if plus the past perfect tense or the past perfect progressive tense plus would, could, might plus the perfect infinitive. If I hadn't had my ID with me, I wouldn't have been able to board the plane to London. If he hadn't been living in England for a decade, he wouldn't have mastered the English language. By the perfect infinitive, we mean this: have plus the third form of the verb. Yeah, he wouldn't have been able, or he wouldn't have mastered. Have mastered is the perfect infinitive. Let's look at more examples. You would have got that job if you hadn't been so nervous in the interview. Had I known then what I know now, I would have done it all differently. If we hadn't run out of petrol yesterday, we wouldn't have had to walk 5 miles to the nearest petrol station. If she had told me about the meeting, I would have come for sure. If I had told you the truth, would you have believed me? The show would have been cancelled if she had refused to participate in it. Mostly, these are regrets. So we speak about situations that happened not in a way we wanted them to in the past. Things we would like to change. We speculate about what would it have been like if the condition we are talking about had been met. Now let's compare different conditional sentences. If the day is sunny, I wear sunglasses. This is conditional 0. If the day is sunny tomorrow, I will wear sunglasses. This is the first conditional. If the day were sunny today, I would wear sunglasses. This is the second conditional. And if the day had been sunny yesterday, I would have worn sunglasses. That's the third conditional. The first two sentences speak about something real. 0 conditional tells us what I normally do. If the day is sunny, I wear sunglasses. That's a fact. The second sentence, which is the first conditional, if the day is sunny, I will wear sunglasses, may speak about the future. In this case, we speak about tomorrow. Yeah, it's not necessary to add the word tomorrow, saying if the day is sunny, I will wear sunglasses. We presume that this situation will happen in the future. Yeah, that we're not talking about this particular moment, but about something which is yet to come. The second conditional, if the day were sunny, I would wear sunglasses, speaks of an unreal situation. The day is not sunny now, but if it were sunny, I would wear sunglasses. And the third conditional speaks about a situation from the past. If the day had been sunny, like yesterday, I would have worn sunglasses. Often, the choice between the first and the second conditional depends on the speaker's attitude to life. For example, I can say, if I get this job, I will earn more. Or I can say, if I got that job, I would earn more. My interview may still be tomorrow, but if I'm an optimist, I will say, if I get this job, I will. If I'm a pessimist, or if I don't believe that I'm a suitable candidate, right from the start, I will speak about this situation in the subjunctive mood, as about something that cannot take place. Let's compare these sentences. In spring, this part of the road gets washed out if there is a lot of rain. 0 conditional. Why? Because it's a regularity. It's certainty. Yeah, this is something that happens every time there is a lot of rain. By the way, in 0 conditionals, you can often replace if with when. This part of the road will get washed out again if there is a lot of rain this spring. The first conditional. So here we speak about a probability. Yeah? So it's not necessary that there will be a lot of rain. And it's not necessary that the road will get washed out, even if there is a lot of rain. But it's highly probable the situation may be real in the future. This part of the road would get washed out if there were a lot of rain this spring. We already know that this is impossible. Yeah, we speak in the subjunctive mood. If there were a lot of rain, but there isn't. So the second conditional is used. This part of the road would have got washed out if there had been a lot of rain last spring. We speak about something from the past. That spring is over, so this is an unreal situation in the past. The third conditional. Now let's talk about punctuation. You have probably noticed that sometimes there is a comma in a conditional sentence and sometimes there is no comma. Why? If the sea isn't rough, we'll be able to sail to the island. And we'll be able to sail to the island if the sea isn't rough. What happens? If the conditional clause goes first, we need to separate it with a comma. Here it is. If the main clause goes first, like in the second sentence, we don't need any comma. Let's look at another example. Where are you? I wouldn't buy such an expensive car. Again, the conditional clause goes first. Where are you? So we separate it with a comma. Where are you? I wouldn't buy such an expensive car. I wouldn't buy such an expensive car. Where are you? The main clause goes first, so we don't need any comma. Now, though typically conditional subordinate clauses are introduced by the conjunction if, they may also be introduced by other conjunctions, namely, on condition that, in the event that, whether or not, provided that, assuming that, in case, unless, even if only, otherwise, and some other conjunctions. In case I had lived 200 years ago, I couldn't have spoken on the phone. This is our subordinate clause, the conditional clause, and we don't have if, we have in case, which has the same meaning as if. Don't speak unless you know the correct answer. Unless you know the correct answer is a subordinate clause, and unless is used here to introduce it. We'll speak about unless a little bit later because it's a very specific word and we want to highlight it. She'll be here at noon, provided that she catches the 10 o'clock bus. Provided that she catches the 10 o'clock bus is the subordinate clause introduced by provided that. Let's look at some other conditional sentences with different conjunctions. Even if you begged him, he wouldn't agree to stay there any longer. You can take my car provided that you return it by Friday. We can strike a bargain with you providing that you offer a good price. Yeah, pay attention that you can say both provided that and providing that. Michael will do the job on condition that we pay upfront. I'll take some cash with me in case they don't accept card payments. Suppose they don't believe you, what would you do? You'd better stop fiddling around with your phone, otherwise the teacher will kick you out of the classroom. And help me with this, otherwise I won't be able to lift the fridge. I will make a separate lesson on all these expressions, all these conjunctions, and I'll provide more examples in that lesson. For now, let's just remember that if is not the only conjunction that you can find in a conditional sentence. There are plenty of them. Some of them are formal, some of them are informal or less formal. We'll discuss that in that separate video. Now let's only talk about unless and not unless. Unless has a negative prefix un. It means if not. Unless means if not. And you should remember about that every time you build your sentence, because that means that your verb, your predicate, mostly will be in the positive form. I won't be able to find the fridge unless you help me. In other words, if you don't help me, I won't be able to lift the fridge. The sentence with unless is neater. It's shorter and more compact, but the sentence with if you don't help me is easier for some English learners to form. I wouldn't apply for this job unless you told me they were hiring. I wouldn't apply for this job if you didn't tell me they were hiring. You would have been miserable unless you had broken up with him first. You would have been miserable if you hadn't broken up with him first. You see that the verb in the subordinate clauses is in the positive form, because unless expresses this negative idea. It says if not, unless you told me, if you didn't tell, right? Unless you had broken, if you hadn't broken up. Don't forget about it when you form a sentence with unless. Now, let's pay attention to these sentences. It's raining really hard. You'd better stay at home unless you don't care about getting wet. I said you will use the positive form of the verb almost always. But you can, of course, use a negative form if you want that meaning. Let's see what this sentence means. This negative component here plays an important role. This sentence means if you don't care about getting wet, you can't go out. In other words, go out only if you're okay with getting wet. Unless you don't care. But if you do care, stay at home. We'll go to the cinema tonight unless you don't want to. Again, we have don't and unless in one clause. This sentence means we are planning to go to the cinema, but we don't have to if you don't want to. Do you see what I mean? Now let's make things even more complicated. We also have not unless in the language, and not unless means only if. We have two negative components that together make a positive sense. Do you want to go to the cinema tonight? Not unless you want to. I will go only if you. Will you be late for the class? Not unless I miss the 7 o'clock train. I will be late only if I miss the 7 o'clock train. Unless describes something that will happen if something else doesn't happen. Not unless says that something else will happen only if something else happens too. You'll predominantly hear it in replies to questions when the answer seems obvious, but there may be a condition on which the thing you're talking about will not happen. Of course, you can always use only if instead of not unless, but not unless is a little bit more emphatic. Now, the last thing I have to speak about is the inverted word order in conditional sentences. You might have noted that some of the examples I showed in this video have a strange word order, like where are you, for example, instead of if I were you. This is the inversion I want to talk to you about. Normally, in English, we have this word order, SVO. The letters stand for subject, verb, and object. You normally start your English sentence with its subject. Then you proceed with the predicate, which is the main verb in the sentence, and then you may have an object. For example, the sentence I arrived doesn't have an object, but the sentence I opened the window has it. And this is very important for the English language because this is an analytical language. That means that the order of words in a sentence shows their relations. We don't have endings that show those relations, like in many other languages. I like chamomiles. I is the subject, like is the verb, and chamomiles is the object. The same is true for if I were a flower, I'd be a chamomile. The second sentence is a conditional sentence. And you see that we have the same canonical word order in both the main clause, I'd be a chamomile, and the subordinate clause, if I were a flower, right? But sometimes we can invert this word order. We can start with a verb. So we'll have verb, subject, object. Of course, you can't do that with any sentence. For example, like I chamomiles makes no sense. But this sentence is a grammatically and semantically sound sentence. Were I a flower? Yeah, you can invert this clause. So when can we do that to a conditional sentence? First of all, we can do that to the second and the third conditional sentences. We can put the verb were to the first place or the auxiliary verb had of the past perfect in the third conditional. Let's see. If I were you, I wouldn't trust them. We can paraphrase it into where are you? I wouldn't trust them. I were you became where are you? The subject and the verb changed places. And this is the second conditional. If I had gone to the central square yesterday, I would have seen the jugglers. Had I gone to the central square yesterday, I would have seen the jugglers. Again, I had gone is paraphrased into had I gone. This is the third conditional. If it weren't raining today, we could go for a walk. Were it not raining today, we could go for a walk. The same, it weren't raining is paraphrased into were it not raining. Pay attention to this. You separate not from the auxiliary verb. So only were and had can be put at the beginning of the sentence. You will have to leave not after your subject. Were it not raining today. Let's see what will happen with the third conditional if the predicate is negative. If I hadn't read that book, I wouldn't have been able to keep up the conversation. Had I not read that book, I wouldn't have been able to keep up the conversation. I hadn't read is paraphrased into had I not read. So we can invert the word order in conditional clauses of conditional number 2 and conditional number 3. What about the first and zero conditionals? Some inversion can take place there too. Let's see. If you see Jane, please ask her to call me. This is a zero conditional and nothing is inverted here. To invert such a sentence, you'll need to insert should in it. If you should see Jane, please ask her to call me. And consequently, should you see Jane, please ask her to call me. If I see her, I will invite her to take part in our discussion. The first conditional. Again, we do the same. We insert should in this sentence. If I should see her, I will invite her to take part in our discussion. And should I see her, I will invite her to take part in our discussion. These inverted sentences are more polite. Okay, this is all I have to say about the 4 types of conditional sentences. There will be 2 more lessons on this topic. We'll speak about mixed conditionals in one of them and about different conjunctions that can be used instead of if. Please subscribe to this channel if you don't want to miss those.